Secularism has manifested itself in humanism, capitalism, communism, liberal democracy, and technoculture in contemporary human history, and refers to a displacement of religious beliefs and sense of community from the moral life of society. Before we delve deeper into the demerits of secularism, let us briefly understand the reason why secular thought emerged following the Reformation and why there was a need to separate the church from the state. This will help us better understand what caused the removal of religion from the public sphere and whether this aligned with secularists' rational thought the way they claim it does. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church had reigned as one of the most powerful institutions. The Church was a constant force in the lives of Europeans during the Middle Ages, and the holders of its notable positions held power greater than kings and queens, who themselves had to pay taxes to the Church. But with great power came greater exploitation in the name of religion. The most criticized abuse of power by the Roman Catholic Church was the selling of indulgences by the Pope, which permitted people to buy release from punishment due to sins, as well as simony, which is the act of selling church positions to the highest bidders. Nepotism existed as well, whereby posts were reserved for family members rather than qualified workers. Popes and bishops paid no attention to their duties as churchmen and instead lived like princes, fighting and spending vast amounts of money, often being uneducated and not even able to read the Bible. The king was said to be ordained by God, and he worked in accordance with the church to exploit the people. A common man was not allowed to read or own a copy of the Bible, and all that was set of rules and laws were to be followed without questioning its validity or reference in the divine scripture. But then came the Reformation, which was a time in the history of Europe when people began to question some of the teachings of the Catholic Church and challenged the authority of the Pope. It began in Germany in 1517 as a protest against abuses in church, and the supporters of this desire for reform were called Protestants. Soon surfaced great conflict in response to which the church passed cruel punishments against all its opponents, and this war between the Protestants and the Catholics stretched to the 1700s, with the 30-Year War from 1618 to 1648 alone seeing the deaths of around 8 million people. So ugly was the conflict and so lasting was the resultant animosity that people started to perceive all religions as enemies of secular thought. The medieval religious regimes thus became characterized by religious and denominational persecution, intolerance, and rising tide of excommunications and executions. This brought a bad name to religion as power. Wholesale migration of populations from Europe to America was a result of these regimes of religious intolerance, with utter disillusionment from the misuse of religion by the political system. In this context, the secular movement expounded the principle of plurality of religions and denominational diversity, and to the exclusion of the role of religion from politics. This resulted in separation of religion and moral and spiritual values based on religion from politics. Fusion between church and state came to an end, and the two became autonomous domains. But the secular movement did not stop here. It further established a new paradigm in which God became irrelevant as far as political and social issues were concerned. A new interpretation of cosmos and laws of nature was developed, which excluded God as the real force behind all that exists. It was claimed that human reason and experience were enough to guide human beings to live their lives on the planet. The only concession made was that if people wanted to believe in God, they may do so in their personal life. As far as the problems of society, economy, and politics were concerned, they would be resolved on the basis of the wishes of the people, guided only by their intellect and experience. Sovereignty of man became the new guiding principle, and human reason and experience were looked upon as the ultimate source for all values, needed for the evolution of human society. In Europe, emancipated, secular ways of thinking about human nature and its true resources inspired the formation of new social and political organizations with the emergence of philosophers such as Nietzsche, who claimed God is dead and rejected Christian morality, stating that if we reject the creed, we should disown the moral code that grew organically from it, and that such moral values keep us from becoming the best version of ourselves. Karl Marx claimed that religion was just the opium of the masses, while Sigmund Freud stated it to be universal obsessional neurosis. With such secular attitudes on the rise, Charles Darwin made a hypothetical adventure into the realm of biology, hypothesizing his famous theory of evolution and thereby emancipating the biological world from its creator. The implications of his theory were obvious. The Jewish, Christian, even Hindu doctrines of man's creation by one ultimate creator were set aside, and humans were made to believe in their secular biological origin. This secularization of man's origin perfectly matched the intellectual climate created by the secularization of the cosmos, theology, history, and philosophy, as it enforced the belief of the Western mind in secularism as a pseudo religion. Soon enough, the entire world was faced with not only rising secularism but atheism as well, characterized by the complete disbelief in God. Now that we're aware of the seed out of which came secularism, let us deal with the widely held belief that religion brings ruin to a society. We saw how the Catholic Church exploited people's lives for ages, but universalized the European experience and draw general rules based on the conflict between Western Christianity and the proponents of humanism, empiricism, and secularism for every civilization is a reductionist fallacy. The same era that saw dark ages in the West saw Islam's golden age in the Muslim world that lasted as long as Muslims did not deviate from the divine word and ruled in accordance with Sharia, which is the Muslims' divine code, divine law, you can say. Therefore, the claim that religion brings the downfall of society at any given period could not be more untrue and unfounded. Moreover, nationalism is an early 18th century development in Europe that came fast once monarchies began to shatter under the impact of changes accumulated during past centuries. In its innocent origin, nationalism stood for the nation's right to control policy making, but as the nationality concept consolidated itself, it replaced God in the public space, allowing national interests the status of the highest moral value. Secularism substituted universal moral standards of good and bad with national interests, and the measures for what is good and bad itself changed. Anything profitable for one's nation, even if it violates justice or what old religious traditions considered as cardinal sin, became desirable, and anything that hurts a nation, even when it involves truth, justice, fair play, or what once was considered as the summit of morality, has turned now bad. First, secularism unfettered them from the moral grid, taking the fear of God from their hearts and reducing them eventually into responsible idolaters of the self. Then came nationalism, which blinded them with national considerations and hate for others, and now democracy saddles them with lawmaking while the administrative machinery takes upon itself the fulfillment of their utilitarian goals. Secularism leads to a fundamentalist outlook in which nothing but secularism can solve socio-economic and political problems of the so-called developing world. With its fatalistic fundamentalist nature, secularism pretends neutrality towards religion. It does not stop the church from building new churches, funeral homes, and raising charities. While inside their churches, synagogues, or masajid, the followers are given liberty to show their respect to their God with whatever name they call him. But once they are out of the holy places, the same God becomes irrelevant and loses all authority over domains of a public authority. In short, public space has no place for God. The secular project of excluding God from the public space is irrational if you think about it. Either God is the master creator of humans and the universe, or he is not. If he is neither the creator nor master, then why have him even in one's private life? But if he is our Lord and the creator, it makes little sense to slash his jurisdiction to private sphere and oust him from the authoritative public sphere. Likewise, if God has made this demarcation, it must go back to divine prominence for proof. In case it is human drawn, the act would be seditious against their creator. Therefore, could there be a more absurd thing to say that every individual in his private life is God's creature, but when the same individuals come together in a social melding, they cease to be his creatures again as separate units? Each individual is God's creature, but when together in fusion, they are not. Only an insane person can conceive this kind of aberrance. It will be equally absurd to believe in him if his guidance is of no consequence to us, neither in work or marketplace, nor in the courts and government corridors, or in peace or war. Why should one worship a God who is incapable of guiding us in our existential complexities? Equally problematic is the notion of splintering life between private and public realms. What people call private life is a non-entity, for humans are born in a civilized ambience with an inescapable collective shade. They are products of a social union between a mother and a father. They eye their first daylight in the lap of their parents, and as they grow into adulthood, they find themselves dealing with society. The countless linkages that connect humans with others have to be sound in their constitution, for it is a prelude to their well-being. So, such sound and fair values of interconnectivity can come from God alone. Speaking of values and morality, religion itself defines such moral values. So basically, most religions have three basic principles: belief in existence of God, belief in the unseen, and belief in heaven and hell. If one rids oneself of these beliefs, he is left with no obligation to pursue that which is morally righteous. It is because of the accountability and the concept of heaven and hell that man is kept away from various transgressions. And if man was to abandon his faith, he would have no reason not to pursue his own desires, even at the expense of others. So he assumes that this worldly life is the only chance at living he'll ever get, and he commits evil without any fear of accountability. While the proponents of secularism claim to be the followers of rationalism without the need for religion to define moral values, I question them. Is it their rationale that guides their morality, or the fear of repercussions due to the legal system? During the riots in Paris, when the police was busy with the riots, all moral code was lost as people started stealing Gucci and Armani bags and televisions from Sony and Bravo stores. Because as soon as the policing institute is shut down, even temporarily, their true colors emerge, and their previously enforced sense of moral righteousness quickly turns to the immoral pursuit of one's own desires. So, in secular countries, people tend to stay morally righteous, not because of the fear of God and the fear of accountability in the afterlife, but because of the fear of the police and the laws of the country. But in religious regions, people's morals are kept in check not because of the fear of the existence of a policing institute, but the fear of God. Therefore, we come to find that the morality of secularists is guided by the fear of accountability in this world due to policing institutes and laws, while the believers find moral righteousness because of the fear of accountability in the next world, like the concept of heaven and hell. Moving on, the state claims a leading role concerning education as a tool for fostering democracy and shaping the profile of responsible and proactive citizens. At the same time, religions claim to have an important role in education too, both as an agent promoting education at the service of parents and society according to their own perspective and worldview, and as an important subject of the educational syllabus. But in secular societies where religious education is either very limited or non-existent entirely, individuals are deprived of religious education, even those that belong to believing families. For instance, in France, the constitutional separation between church and state materialized in the early 20th century when religious education in state schools was abolished in 1882 and replaced by general ethical instruction. Similar steps were taken in Japan, Turkey, and the United States of America. Because of the absence of religious education, what is wrong with me? Individuals become increasingly fashioned into a secular mold because of non godly education and irreligious social thrusts. Moreover, some states require from its citizens a religiously neutral identity in certain public spaces and in certain official facilities. In doing so, the state intends to preserve its neutral and secular culture at the expense of individuals' religious freedom, compelling citizens to shed their own religious and cultural identity. If secularism stands for religious diversity and religion's removal from the matters of the state, then how come that France banned the wearing of hijab for the Muslims, which further fueled the prevailing religious intolerance? Therefore, I fail to discern on reason that secularism stands for the freedom of religious practices. When it comes to improving the human situation, secular laws are of no consequence, for they rely on the same morally deformed people whom they propose to rehabilitate. For example, the Americans struggled to build an anti-liquor offensive for years. They spent millions of dollars highlighting its harm. Supporters of the ban built a powerful case around its harmful impact on humans' morality and economy, lacing it with information from the medical sciences, statistical data, and reason. Doubtless, it was a conclusive case. They employed every conceivable means in order to persuade people to give it up. Besides, the nation's greatest body, representing its collective will, merged to pass legislation on its ban. The whole US geared up its resources to make prohibition effective, but despite its high literacy rate, intelligence, and wit, the nation refused to honor the ban, and within 14 years, prohibition laws collapsed before the recalcitrance of the American people and the laws were withdrawn. As opposed to this, Islam launched no organized campaign against liquor. What could not be achieved in the US with billions of dollars and the state force behind it was obtained in the Muslim world with a single pronouncement from Allah's Messenger. Not a single penny did the Muslims spend on it, but the Prophet just said that Allah had declared liquor unlawful and his people complied with the ban immediately. Their retraction was so genuine that as long as they stayed within the bounds of religion, they never regressed into their old dependence of alcohol. If one looks into this great difference that sets the two systems apart, some notable aspects surface, which are not only the key to liquor prohibition but also to all aspects of law and morality. For example, man-made laws receive their rationale and sustenance from the will of the people, but unfortunately, what we call the people's will is nothing but a reflection of their inclinations and feelings, the influences that they receive, and the hidden persuasion that works on them. Such a mix of factors has a compulsive effect on determining right and wrong, allowed and disallowed. The law changes because of it, and thus, in the absence of any enduring value behind them, both laws as well as civilizations are in a declining flux. No matter how enlightened a society is in knowledge and organizational management, it cannot rid itself of the vagaries of the self unless it believes and submits itself to divine laws. In the absence of a living faith, law becomes shallow and desires dictate everything else. Though people know their harm like the shining sun in the sky, but so bull-headed is their resistance to a moral change that even when this rationalist's God, which is named science, is brought to them as witness, they refuse to listen. They take nothing as conclusive even when statistical evidence is piled before them or when experimentation and observation establish its harm. This shows us that to rebuild man's moral fiber or to make his conscience and enthuse it with resistance to evils outside the realm of philosophy and science is a rather difficult task, which only belief in the divine can accomplish.